All right. Hello, everyone. We're here today with Uranus in the 10th house and Capricorn. So we'll start by giving a brief overview of the meaning of the 10th house Capricorn archetype, apply Uranus to that, and then look at a few interesting chart examples. So the 10th house Capricorn archetype corresponds to the total structural reality that is manifest within any given lifetime. This relates both to the society, country, culture that a soul is born into, which includes its norms, its rules, its judgment, the social judgments, the governmental rules, all of that, including the social, gender constructs. Every society or country or community even has a particular judgment or idea around right and wrong. And these judgments or these constructs or these rules will be applied in all kinds of directions. So we can have something as simple as, it's wrong to cross the red light in traffic. And that idea of wrong corresponds to more of a social functionality. You're not a bad person if you do it, but it's wrong in the sense that it's illegal or it's just not useful, right? And if you really look at right and wrong in the most stripped down sense, wrong simply says not aligned, it's not useful, it's not right. Then we have constructs of right and wrong that kind of are somewhat distorted and add to it a sort of judgment that doesn't come from truth, it doesn't come from nature, it doesn't exist anywhere. Right? You are wrong for being this, for being, for expressing yourself this way, for acting this way, for making this mistake, for acting out of alignment. It's where rights and wrongs are then becoming a judgment of character. And we have the distinction in the 10th house Capricorn of the difference between what we can call as sort of natural judgment and then distorted patriarchal projections and judgments. We have a lot of that within the world that we live in. So these will correspond to all kinds of gender and social constructs and racial constructs, etc., that say this is what's right. This is who you're supposed to be. And there's a pressure within every family. 10th house Capricorn also symbolizes family structure, family history, family tree. There's a pressure within every family or society or country to conform, to fit into that. And the need within the 10th house Capricorn is to be a part of society, to be a part of this world, to learn how to cultivate a quality of self-agency and self-authority, to structure one's life within time and space experience in order to function in life, but without becoming overly conditioned by that which is unnatural. Judgments and constructs that we inherit or we adopt and we believe to be true. And then suddenly we're walking around life believing, I have to be this way, right? And so there's an internalized shame and internalized conditioning. And Jeffrey Wolfe Green once said something like, most souls don't know the extent to which they're conditioned. And I would say, to add to that, the conditioning is like the ocean that we're swimming in. And it requires a sort of introspection to become aware that we're in it. Every child will grow up within a structural reality full of all kinds of ideas and constructs and judgments and rules and ways of being. And all of that becomes normalized. Even dysfunction and repression or suppression or judgment, all of that becomes normalized if that is the world we grow up in. And so it really takes a lot of introspection on this soul journey. And this is a part of the work of any planet manifesting within these archetypes and Saturn as well, to become aware of really, how do I feel? Cancer polarity. Am I functioning in a good way? Do I feel whole and integrated and happy with my life? And we're going to have the tension between everything that I've come to know and the conditioning and the decisions and the patterning of thought that I've become used to, that's become like a grove in the record, that's brought me to where I am now, between that and sort of who I am and where I want to go. And is this taking me to where I want to go? That long-term thoughtfulness are the ways that I'm laying each brick down in the building of my life. Is it feeling helpful or useful? Well, I was told to do it that way, or that's what I'm supposed to do, or if I do it this way, I'm going to get judged, or it's not okay, it's not allowed, or I don't feel like I'm supposed to. There can be this deep sense of needing to be punished relative to a sense of having violated natural law, having acted out of alignment. There can be an immense amount of guilt and an attraction to punishment and sin and being a bad person in this archetype. But we become introspective. Am I laying the foundation for the future to create a life that really feels good and workable? And I would say one of the higher expressions of this archetype is working with time and space and form in such a way where it becomes a container for the soul's evolution. And it becomes less of an ongoing struggle, like a root chakra struggle, like constantly struggling with the basics of reality, time, space, form, getting things on time, paying the bills, working with judgment. There can be this deep fear of being judged. And I get almost like a protectiveness or defensiveness in this archetype relative to one's own internalized judgments of being wrong or unprocessed shame. Going beyond that, we kind of come into the archetype of the elder, which represents this idea, the state of being at peace with oneself, with one's life, not struggling with just being grounded in a stable way. We're respecting ourselves. We're not overly conditioned. We're not repressing ourselves. So that Cancer polarity, I'll give a quote later that Jim Carrey shared. It's a quote from Jeff Foster. It says something like, depression is really a need for deep rest. Being able to look at one's life, the status quo of one's life, and to actually come back inside and to know oneself. And if we do that work, we can grow and get older and know who we are and be in right relationship to all the elements of our life. So there's an immense amount of discipleship and practice, because, and I'll just end this introduction with this thought. There's a very practical reality to the 10th house, which is some things work and some things don't work. Partying all night and not sleeping before your big test doesn't work. Maybe it'll work for a time. There's a sort of like, we have a sort of privilege or leeway karmically, I find, on this life journey for a while, especially when we're young, where the rope is long. So we can kind of like be irresponsible and not experience the consequences, right? At around 40, your metabolism changes, or when you get older, there's more responsibilities. That leeway is, so it's like metaphorically, you're not given as much of a permission slip. Your karma runs out, so to speak. Your free passes, and it's just one funny way of thinking of it. And we get to realize, okay, well, that doesn't work. I need to take more responsibility for my life. And when we come to that from wisdom, from understanding, from the learning of, well, that failed, that didn't work, that was dysfunctional, it's coming from within. Otherwise, the other expression of that is just following the rules. And there's an issue here. We'll really see this with Uranus, where we can age, and we've just been living our whole life following the rules. Like we're told, you'd always show up on time, always do it this way. But if the rules are coming from the outside, at some point, the pressure of that's going to create some kind of disease. With Uranus, it's going to affect some kind of rebellion or breakthrough or breakout, or, something's going to shock us out of that repression. So it has to come from within. There has to be a learned wisdom, which means discipline, being a disciple to a path of alignment, and really being able to learn from our experience, to learn from others who have good guidance from us without sourcing our authority outside. That's one of the deeper dimensions of this archetype. Do you want to add anything to this introduction?
Absolutely. You covered a lot of ground and a lot of thoughts. There's a social pressure to conform when you live in a society or a group or a family or a culture. And nobody wants to feel insecure through the polarity, Cancer. And so there is a natural need to conform in order to feel safe or secure or included or a part of things. And of course, a fear of judgment is such a big part of it. There are some souls, few souls, rare souls who will never conform. And Jeffrey used to say, I'm just a soul who never allowed myself to conform, and did create a lot of trauma for him and crises and things like that. But that was a priority, Capricorn, for him, to just be who he was and let the chips fall where they may. So one thing you mentioned was guilt. People feeling guilty if they don't do this or that, if they're late for this, or they don't follow this rule. One of the most important teachings for Capricorn and Saturn as it relates to guilt is to understand that there are two forms. There's natural guilt and there's conditioned guilt. Conditioned guilt they're the rules or the things that we are taught through our own conditioning that says, this is right, this is wrong. And when we have collected all of this conditioned guilt that has nothing to do with what's natural, like in the Catholic Church, they tell you, that it's wrong to touch yourself, for example, or whatever it might be. And so, of course, if any kind of stirrings come up in a young teen or anything like that, and then they're constantly feeling guilty for something that is natural, right? So anything that is conditioned in the consciousness, any kind of conditioned guilt, I should say, that is collected in the consciousness over time that is not natural is meant to be purged. And anything that is natural that we do that is wrong, anything we do that is wrong, that we know is wrong, we don't need some law to tell us that. Any kind of natural guilt, whether if we've betrayed someone or we've been dishonest, we're going to feel guilty, of course. And so that form of guilt that is natural is meant to stay in the consciousness or in the soul forever. Mm. So you're reminded of that experience, and so that you never do it again. Mm. So there's natural guilt and there's conditioned guilt, and it's about, as it relates to Uranus, and we'll get into that, it's about being able to objectify and know the difference between the two, to allow whatever feels natural inside of you where you are feeling guilty about something. I mean, not to belabor it so much that it prevents you from moving on with your life, but to take responsibility for it. Yeah, I did that, and I feel remorseful for it. I'm not going to do it again. I've learned from that. And so, but to really be able to release anything that is not naturally true or meant to be shouldered by you.
Beautiful. So, do you want to introduce Uranus within this archetype?
Sure, absolutely. So, as it relates to Saturn, Saturn is what will give structural cohesion and definition to what is outwardly and inwardly already known. So, for example, when you put consciousness in a cup or consciousness in a form, your soul comes into the body. It's going to take the form of this body. The consciousness is Uranus. Creation projects an energy, or a consciousness projects a vibration that is Uranus that reflects your signal. Mm. So your soul is inside this form, Saturn, and that soul is Pluto, but the vibration of your soul, the fingerprint is Pluto, but the signal, the song, the energy that emits is Uranus. The soul's vibration. Vibration is Uranus. And so I like to think about the root chakra. You brought that up earlier. The root chakra, every chakra, the energy centers in our body are ruled by a planet. And at the root chakra, there's 3 planets that rule the root. At the root of the root is Pluto, which is our soul. The middle layer of the root chakra is Uranus, which is the soul's vibration. And that's consciousness in the human form. And the outer ring of the root chakra is Saturn. So it's Pluto, Uranus, the energy center, and then Saturn, which is the container or the casing that houses the soul. Now, if you think about it, we're not going to walk around unprotected. We have skin and bones to keep our soul inside. That's Saturn. That's the physical, the material is Saturn, right? So at the root chakra, if our soul is emanating a signal that says, this is who I am, we all need some degree of protection. It feels safe and secure. So the outer ring we all have, that Saturn holding in the soul, the consciousness. And depending on how much anybody is repressing at any point in time will reflect how thick that outer ring is. If somebody's walking in the world as they are, and they're just free within themselves, and unapologetically so, like I love to see, and we all want to feel, that ring around the outside, that casing, that Saturn casing is going to be thin. But if you're really repressing a lot, you're holding back, you're feeling guilty about something, you're judging yourself for something, or maybe you have just a lot of fear about making a big decision, or fear about expressing yourself in the world. Will I be successful? Will I be judged? Fear about having a conversation, an honest conversation with somebody. How are they going to take it? I don't want to hurt them. Whatever it is that you're repressing, that you're holding on to, that you're not allowing to move, that outer ring is going to be thick, thick, thick. And so just take a Uranus transit in your life. It may be coming across your Saturn. What's that going to do? That's going to be jackhammer to cement. It's going to rattle the cage. And so I like to think about Uranus in Capricorn of the 10th house as really a reflection of those outer two elements of the root chakra. How much are you repressing? How much of your signal are you allowing to be admitted? And if it's retrograde when you're born, if Uranus is retrograde and when you're born, you are going to rebel quite a bit. You are not going to want to conform. No way, Jose. In fact, you might be somebody that's come here to be really innovative with the world, to change the laws, to change the customs. Maybe you're an activist, a human rights activist, or some environmental activist, some type of activist. You want to change those rules. Uranus in Capricorn retrograde in particular. And for sure, if you have Uranus direct in Capricorn or Uranus in the 10th house, absolutely you can promote change. You can be a facilitator for change. It all depends on your stage of evolution. It depends on the aspects that Uranus is making. We have some wonderful examples today about that. So essentially, though, lastly, I'll just say, Ari, is that Uranus in Capricorn does reflect each tribe or culture or country's definition of what's right and wrong, right? The rules, the laws. You think of an Indian tribe as a Uranian element, its own culture, tribe. And I think of the Capricorn piece of this, the white man coming in to disrupt that tribe. So, there are tribes and cultures all over the globe as we know it today. Yeah.
So when we think about Uranus in Capricorn or 10th house, we can look at any of these cultures, these tribes, these governments, these nations, and see that, okay, we are going to be liberating from judgment, from all these definitions and constructs that say, this is who you are, this is what you have to be, because within every single one of these cultures or tribes or nations are a whole bunch of constructs and conditions that are unnatural to our own vibration. And one of the things, and I love that you brought in the idea of Uranus being vibration. I often say like soul individuality, and vibration just kind of gives it another like really fresh dimension. And your vibe attracts tribe. We've heard that one before. But itself, your vibe attracts your tribe.
Right.
But then you have the tribe that you were born into. From a 10th house perspective, right? This skin color, this country. And there can be an underlying disidentification with the external social constructs, judgment, ideas, rules, laws that are being posed upon oneself. The idea is to realize there's a total dissociation between who I am and that. These are just projections. And so the liberation becomes, oh, yes, on the outside, I appear to be this skin color, in this body, in this country. And that is just the external shell. None of that defines me. And so there's almost a total turning one's attention away from all of these superficial, which is a good 10th house word. It's just form. It's just an empty shell. There's no content in it. And awakening to one's inherent soul individuality. So our own vibration, our own soul nature will bring us into resonance with a way of life that may not fit into a box. And so here's where some of the trauma comes in. we can find ourselves breaking the rules, breaking the law. Sometimes the law and the rules, more often than not, are actually oppressive and repressive. Uranus corresponds to subdivisions of society, groups of people that don't fit into the mainstream, especially in the 10th house. So we could have groups of people that are being ostracized, Uranus, right? They're outsiders because of the rules or the constructs or the judgments of mainstream society, or people or individuals that are then cast out or judged or persecuted because they're not fitting into who they're supposed to be. There can thus be a paranoia or fear. I don't want to break the rules. I don't want to get in trouble. A soul might be needing to liberate from this seemingly irrational fear of getting in trouble. And on the other hand, entirely, with Uranus in the 10th or Capricorn, there can be this perpetual rebellious quality. I am refusing to cooperate with any rules at all. Now, the issue with that, and this is a dynamic with Uranus in general, it can result in a soul that isn't a team player, right? Because there's a need within Uranus to recognize the basic truth of we're all here together. This is one greater ecosystem. And me being myself is in harmony and resonance and support to you being yourself. And it's never a better than or worse than or insider or outsider. But there can be this underlying rebellious quality where one is always creating trauma in the environment by way of breaking the rules and rebelling against them. That's like the rebel without a cause. Like, come on, just stop calling out during class. No one's going to tell me not to call out, tell me to raise my hand. But it's like, that's where it's not about liberating from judgments or arbitrary rules. It's about this need to almost act in a stressful, anxious way to actually not be defined by them. And this is an important thing that we'll look at, where there can be an absolute refusal and the creation of a lot of trauma and separation and division and disorder, right? 10th house is all about order and cohesion and structure. Uranus can be anarchy, but the point of it isn't like some kind of free-for-all where everyone does their own thing and no one takes accountability. That's pure trauma. The idea is to liberate from what is not necessary for one's own soul nature. And actually, we can say it's finding a higher intelligence of structure, because we're still in a human body. And until the very last stages of awakening, there is a relationship to this human form into time and space and learning how to work with it consciously. It's elevating the status quo. Uranus in the 10th house. It's realizing there's a better and a different way to live that is less divisive, less divisions, less judgment, that's more inclusive. So in individuated stages, it can be, screw these stupid rules that have to do with skin color and gender and race. Like, that's not necessary. But in more spiritual stages, it can be the realization of, yeah, I'm not this body or this role or any of these rules or judgments or constructs. What is the calling of my own soul individuality? It's even being able to disidentify from one's family lineage and strip away entirely to a place of what is authentic to my own soul vibration. It's more of like a freedom, a true freedom from the known, and a non-concern with what my family thinks, with what society thinks. I am free to be myself. And that will always give rise to new forms of living, new ways of organizing ourselves as human beings. That is always beyond the threshold of anything that we've known. So also, people with a signature can be incredibly inventive. You know, we could have radical political leaders. We could also have just souls that define their life in ways that no one else has ever seen before, and open up new possibilities, new pathways for what it's like to be here. Like, oh, that's allowed too. I judge that, but actually you can be that too. I mean, a basic example of that can be someone that is crossing gender lines. Suddenly they're playing a sport that was only for men. It's like, oh yeah, it was just a thought, Uranus. I just had a thought that said that's not allowed, but really that was just a thought. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, a little bit different, but you're on your way there. I'm talking about the string that gets shorter and shorter
Mm-hmm.
when you get older. But you haven't reached your Uranus opposition yet. Ari, but I sure remember mine. 41, 42 years old. Everybody goes through a midlife crisis around that time. There's an
Right.
astrological signature for it. And I love the story that Jeffrey shared as an example. It would be like the banker, that's got the multi-million dollar house. The credit cards are all maxed, all of the race cars,
Mm,
sports cars, fancy cars in the driveway, and the wife and 4 kids and living the high life. And he's like, that's it. Like, I've had enough up to here.
mhm,
And he just walks away from it all to sell t-shirts on the beach in Malibu. He just wants to be simple and just, throwing it all off, all this material stuff that he's collected, or this ambition, and just kicking it to the curb and saying, bye-bye, no more.
mhm,
This is
mhm,
not what I want. And so that kind of rebellion too can happen. I know that at my Uranus opposition at that time, it was one of the most intense times of my life, but a rapid period of deconditioning, I would say for sure. So even if you don't have Uranus in the 10th or Uranus in a Capricorn, we all have Uranus transits to our Saturn, or aspecting planets that we might have in Capricorn that are really going to work on unwrapping, are helping to further unwrap those layers of holding unwanted by the soul, but have been in place to attempt to keep you safe. But it's time bound, just a
mhm.
matter of time.
I'm glad you brought that up. Another common Uranus dynamic that we have to remember is the idea of a metaphor, like where we can metaphorically recognize some element of life as symbolizing a state of liberation, but it's just so like the midlife crisis can be, I'm wearing torn up jeans again and I'm listening to the music that I was into when I was in high school. It represents some sort of lost sense of freedom before all the pressures of life conditioned our thinking so strongly. So there's a powerful, Jeff Green speaks about this in the Uranus book, where a soul can be inwardly liberated, but just sort of walking the life of on the outside, everything seems normal, but they're not identified with the form. And that's almost a higher state of realization than the need to almost like prove to oneself or grab onto some sort of symbol of freedom, which is just another form of working out one's identity and one's sense of I'm not being myself. And all of that is just another way of trying to find out, how can I feel free from all the repression, all the judgments, all the pressure that I've endured over so many years. All right. So shall we look at some examples?
Definitely.
All right. Let's do that. Okay. I love this image that you found. Let's do the slideshow from the beginning. It's so great. I bet there are many people that work at the United Nations that have Uranus in the 10th, because at a certain level of conscious, like just like the unity of all nations, right? We're part of a global community, all people, all walks of life, all flags, all representations. In the future, at some point, when we start having more interaction with other galactic beings, I'm often corrected and to not call them aliens. It's not PC, but galactic people. That'll also be Uranus in the 10th house. It's acknowledging there are societies and cultures and worlds, civilizations outside of this planet that we could also appreciate as a part of this greater community. So it can expand so far, so profoundly. So I love this image. Okay. Jim Carrey. He's the first person I thought of when I began thinking about this class today. And so I want to share this quote from him in an interview. The difference between depression and sadness is that sadness is just from happenstance. Whatever happened or didn't happen for you, or grief, or whatever it is. Depression is your body saying, fuck, I don't want to be this character anymore. I don't want to hold up this avatar that you created. And the world is too much for me. I can really see in this quote, this rebellious quality. Like he struggled with depression for many years in his life. And from a Uranus in the 10th house point of view, obviously he's a Pluto in the 10th house soul as well. It's the sense of something in his soul, right? His own authentic vibration saying, you know, I'm not going to repeat the curse word, but it's like I'm done with you. I am not this character. And I love it at the 29th degree of Leo retrograde. It's such a culmination. There's such a deep bringing together and reflection on the roles that I played, how I've projected a story of creative actualization and success in this world. And it's all just a character. I've learned, here's another really cool quote. They're all characters, including Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey was a less intentional character because I thought I was just building something that people would like. Right? And so a big part of his, and he's early stage, he's spiritual stage, early spiritual stage. He's been on a spiritual awakening for the past several years in the unraveling of, I don't know if you're aware of that, in the unraveling of all of these roles and constructs that he's played for so many years. It's just really fascinating. And he's kind of, he's working it out. And I think a lot of that is working through a lot of trauma, and really being able to unravel, how did I build this identity construct and this idea of who I am and what's valuable, who I'm supposed to be in the world. There's some other really interesting quote, which he said something like he recently said that he's retiring from acting unless like a really good role comes up. And he said in the interview, I've done enough. I have enough. And that's something you'll never hear anyone in Hollywood ever say. He said he's really content with he does a lot of painting. He's really content with his painting life and with his spiritual life. I have enough and I've done enough.
Yeah, I mean, it was like rapid fire, him working out all these characters all his life from other lifetimes, right?
Oh my God, yeah.
Squaring the Neptune and Scorpio, squaring the nodes, and talk about just being on stage to do it, right? One after the other. And, you know, I think not only was he easy, of course, someone making other people laugh, he's laughing at himself, you know, along the same lines. And was it Bruce Almighty when he played that character where he's got like superpowers, or he's some spiritual guru type of person or something? Anyway, that role was, you know, that was an incredible movie, actually, looking at his chart and how it's reflected there. You know, just how far people can go with things. But yeah, this is a wonderful example for Uranus retrograde, 29 degrees and 46 minutes on the midheaven, in that house of his public self. I mean, he's clearly culminating lifetimes and lifetimes of identities, right? Or even, characters, identities, and the way that he's looked at life, thought about life, believed about life. I mean, the depression really, of course, for him until I don't know if he's still depressed now that he's got an active spiritual life, but there's got to be more than this. That's the fastest way to lead someone to depression, you know, where you're projecting meaning onto things that will never be able to fill you up ever.
Yeah. There, early in his career, he would get on, before he was famous, he would get on stage and oftentimes he would do things that were offensive.
Yeah.
Like he once got up naked, just wearing a sock on his private parts, right? And people didn't like that. And sometimes he would just he at some point just said to the audience, I hate you all. He's been working out this interesting piece around being a disturber and disrupting the status quo and creating disorder, creating shock, and alienating others and alienating himself. I think a part of his life journey was needing to integrate that like rebellious, I'm not following the rules, I'm messing things up, I'm saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. I mean, he has all this Aquarius third house south node dynamic ruled by Uranus in the 10th house. It's like, I'm not gonna say the right thing at the right time. I'm gonna disrupt the status quo. Also, that Uranus is in conjunct, it's ruled by and in conjunct both to that sun and the sun's ruler, Saturn. It's like a rulership circle or a triangle here between Uranus, Saturn, and the sun. And it's all in the third house. It's being inappropriate with his speech. And also a lot of his role playing has to do with his voicing, his character, his ability to articulate and express himself in these really wacky and interesting ways. He was always kind of working out this sense of almost like a narcissistic entitlement. I want to do and say and act however I want to act. And hey, you don't like me? Well, that's your issue. Needing to kind of purge that and play it out and actually create a platform to play out these characters and actually be seen and acknowledged and famous for and to become successful in order to eventually come full term and to sort of realize, okay, none of that's me anyway. It's some kind of identity I needed to know myself. I needed to experience and integrate. All of these actors that have such interesting roles, you always see it, how they're just playing out their chart. They're just working out different facets of their own being. It's so interesting.
Definitely feel like he's this, he's like the king of shock value. That's also characteristic, and a very much a physical actor, not just his voice. Of course, the voices were the big one. He just had so many. But what he did with his body while he was acting, that's so Capricorn. And he's clearly got a sun, Venus, Mars, and Capricorn. He's the whole package. What can I say? Like, he's using the whole thing, the voice, his words, his timing. And, I realize that this isn't a show about Jupiter and Mercury, but look at them. They could not be more tightly conjunct.
Yeah.
And Jupiter is the planet of humor. And so he just came in with just a rock star chart for a comedian.
Balsamic to the South Node. It's such a big part of his soul. Yeah.
It's huge. But, we all, I remember I wanted to share this and I'd forgotten when we were doing Uranus in the 8th house. And maybe I did say it when we did Uranus in Sagittarius. Now I'm forgetting, but I'll say it again if I didn't, or if I did, that Jeffrey Wolfe Green has Uranus in the 8th and a lot of Scorpio planets, but also a lot of Sag planets. And he used to say that if I wasn't a Sag,
yeah, you mentioned that,
right? Did I say that? Okay, so, but it's part of why he said that was not just about feeling like he was lucky being at the right place at the right time before something happened, especially when he was at war, but it was more about his sense of humor. Being just a gala sense of humor. This sense of humor is what has saved him in many situations, because if we can't laugh at ourselves or, find a way to access that place within us that is, the laughter affects the nervous system, which is Uranus. It affects our anxiety level. It affects our stress level. So when we have a belly aching laughter that brings us to tears, we're laughing so hard we can't breathe. That's Uranus. It completely relaxes the nervous system. And that is one thing that Jim Carrey knows.
I love that. I mean, maybe that's why I've had a lifelong dream of being a comedian. When I was a child, I loved this. I mean, I loved comedians. I would read the autobiographies of comedians. I just wanted to know everything about comedians. So, yeah. Okay, great. So anything else you want to add about this chart?
I think that's it. Just that I do agree with you that, with Pluto, Uranus, balsamic, Uranus ruling all the South Node and that string of planets near the South Node, that this is a life of culminating many lives.
And if anyone really wants to get a sense, I mean, there's so much content on this guy. He's a great example of, in my opinion, in my perspective, transitioning from individuated to spiritual in this lifetime. Absolutely. And just seeing how he speaks about the realization of not being any of these characters and roles, it just, you really can feel that Uranus, and also look at it in context of that Pluto as well. This is one of those, in my sense, an accessible learning chart, right? It's really easy to grasp this one. Okay, take it away for this next one. What's up?
Go back one. He's got Neptune spraying the nose. He's Scorpio, right? This spiritual life, he's been working forward toward it, but I think there's been some avoidance at the same time. There's this back and forth, and so there's a lot that he needed to fulfill in this lifetime before he was ready to dive in.
Right. Actually, that it's approaching that square. So it would say this dynamic has been playing for a while, and he hasn't fully resolved it.
Mhm.
So yeah, that to maybe he's been in transition for quite some time. That's a really good point. Okay.
Okay.
Nadia
What a
Murad.
great picture of her you found. Nadia Murad she is a human rights activist, and she's a survivor of
Oh,
captivity.
can you clarify that this is not the correct birth time?
Oh, yes, thank
Right.
you.
Yeah.
This is a rectified chart. I do not have the birth time. This is what I think it is a good example of what it very well could be. But we're just going to focus mostly on Uranus and Capricorn and the aspects that it's making and the archetypes of the planets that are involved. So Nadia was born and raised in Kocho. I don't know, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, but it's a small village of shepherds and farmers in northern Iraq.
Hmm.
And she is from the Yazidi community. They have their own religion of sorts. And she and her siblings led a really quiet life in this village. Like I said, farmers and shepherds. And she had a dream of being a history teacher or owning her own beauty salon.
Hmm.
And when she was 21 on August 15th, 2014, ISIS invaded her town.
Should I pull up that chart?
And sure, ISIS invaded her town and were trying to convert them to the Islam religion. And when they refused, they separated the women and the men. And 6 of her brothers were executed, basically all lined up and just, her whole town could fit on the playground of the school. I mean, it wasn't a big town. So I don't know that the women were upstairs in one of the classrooms. And of course, we're hearing this happening, not watching, but hearing. And they were taken away, all the young women, and sold as sex slaves. So this is August 15th, 2014. Now, before I talk further about what happened, she did write a book called The Last Girl. Oh, you can't read it backwards on here. I wrote a book called The Last Girl. It's an excellent book about her life, and I highly recommend it. What she meant by the last girl is she wanted to be the last girl that ever had a story like this.
Hmm.
So Uranus and Capricorn, a big part of their culture, I mean, their beliefs, their rituals, their religious rituals, everything that made them who they were. There's a lot of customs, a lot of things that they did that was unique to their culture and community. And the ISIS group wanted to erase them from Earth, erase any memory of them. The beliefs that they had about this community, it just the pure hatred and where it led, the result of that was just insane. So we can go to the transits chart again. So this community, they're singled out for religious persecution, and ultimately 5,200 women of this culture were sold into sex slavery, and 5,000 men were killed. And so she was bought and sold several times by military men within 3 months. So for 3 months, she was tossed around a bit, and she was sold, as I said, into slavery. Some of these women were sold on Facebook for like $20. It was just disgusting. Anyway, she did try to escape at one point and was caught, and that her punishment resulted into a gang raping. So she decided she didn't want to try that again. But at one point she found an unlocked door, and she did make her escape, and she was able to escape 3 months later. But let's talk about this chart for a moment, because Uranus in Capricorn conjunct Neptune in Capricorn right there is reflecting the trauma that she and her family and her spiritual community experienced and because of judgments that were not the same as what they believed in. And it was the Uranus in Capricorn is opposing Mars in Cancer. So this is reflecting just the trauma of loss of her mother, by the way, was also killed and thrown into an unmarked grave. She was extremely close to her. When she talks about her mother, I mean, I just choking back the tears. You could tell how much she still misses her and just how brutal that was. There's just such a dedication to the mother in this culture and a respect to the family. I mean, but for sure to the mother and the father. So we see here that on this day, Saturn was, Saturn was forming an inconjunct to transiting Uranus, and transiting Uranus was squaring her natal Uranus. Saturn is in Scorpio and is ruling Pluto and Capricorn, which is opposing her Mars. And so there's various signatures here for, of course, transiting Saturn is squaring her natal Saturn. I mean, everywhere you look, you know, you just want to pull the covers over your head. Transiting Mars in Scorpio also on approaching a square to her Saturn.
And the nodes squaring her Uranus too.
The nodes also squaring her Uranus as well. Wow, yeah. And during that whole period, remembering the nodes take 18 years to go all the way around the wheel. So this is a timing aspect, right? Now, Pluto, transiting Pluto, we don't know the time she was born that day, but this looks pretty close. I mean, transiting Pluto is exactly square the moon. In this case, I put her in a 10th house position because she's such a public figure now. She won a Nobel Prize for all her work on human rights, and she's well known all over the world at this point. And so she's a public figure. Of course, she ended up in Germany. She fled and ultimately ended up in Germany, where she lives now. I think of Germany as so Capricorn in its culture. And it puts Saturn in the first house. It's a Capricorn Aries line. It's Capricorn culture Aries line. So when you think about the timing of this, right, with Uranus in Capricorn, Saturn ruling Capricorn and having this exact square to her natal Saturn in Aquarius, right? So the way that they felt so different in their community and culture was that they were not the majority, right? This is another way that Uranus plays out. I mean, they are really devoted to their religion, to their God, and to the way that they went about their prayers, their rituals, and etc. So
what was her religion? What was the culture again?
I mean, I can't remember exactly, but when they say that they are a Yazidi community, I will try and find that out.
Yeah.
But you know, the Jews and the Christians were relatively protected from the Islamic State, you know, in their countries. But it's that much different than the Islamic religion that they're, you know, wanting to destroy the culture and anything connected to it. So the rape signature is the Uranus in Capricorn opposing the Mars in Cancer. And that would include the group rape that happened. The gang group is Uranus. It's a group of people opposing her Mars in Cancer. So, you know, it's incredible because the fact that even Jupiter, I'm sure, was conjunct her moon at some point in the day. You think about being lucky and how lucky to survive. I don't know if you are lucky to survive such a thing, to lose everybody that you love in that way. But she definitely is a survivor. That's why I put her Venus in the second, the ruler of the Jupiter moon. A Jupiter moon balsamic, I feel is balsamic. Putting the moon in the 8th and Jupiter in the 9th, which is her work, international work now on the subject. Not only speaking out for women, but, you know, to be able to worship as you wish and, you know, to have that be your choice. Do you have any thoughts about this?
Let's go back to the chart just to tune into that. I'm just wanting to highlight this generational piece. So a lot of souls born around this time have a Uranus-Neptune conjunction in Capricorn. It's interesting. I feel like I've talked like a lot of souls have Uranus-Saturn at the end of Sag or early Capricorn, and that theme comes up a lot. She's a pretty young soul, so I think it's actually going to happen more often that we're going to see chart examples of this Uranus-Neptune conjunction. I just want to highlight that this can really speak to a massive amount of group trauma. Neptune speaks to that which is universal and where there can be a total sense of having absolutely no control, or masses where it's just like you're one of many. And then we're looking at a particular culture, people. I mean, that signature itself just speaks so strongly to almost like the annihilation or the persecution or the just something horrible happening to a group of people that become almost like it reminds me of the Holocaust, like where we have groups of Jews that are just, put in the gas chamber all at once, that kind of thing. But at the same time, Uranus, Neptune then can correspond to an awakening within consciousness that results in a collective liberation and inspiration for souls all over the world. Uranus itself in Capricorn in general will speak to groups of people all over the world rebelling against the structure of the status quo, the patriarchy, the oppression. When you link that with Neptune, it becomes a source of hope and inspiration and healing, where it's almost like all of the trauma and the separation and the pain becomes a stepping stone for collective healing and inspiration. So it's like her story, her liberation becomes accessible and available to everyone at all walks of life. That's a part of what I see with the Neptunian quality. Also speaking to Uranus there. So I'm sorry, with Mercury there, the calling to communicate, to share her voice, and just very clear here. There's an impulse within her own soul to free herself up and to share her message, and it's squaring that Jupiter as well. So it's a very great chart example of a soul that has refused to allow herself to be broken, to be pushed down.
Still committed, still committed.
Yeah.
She had never even seen an airplane before. She had never, not only had she never been to Baghdad, she'd never seen an airplane. And she would never in her wildest dreams did she think she'd be addressing the United Nations on the subject. So, I mean, think about that for a farm girl who had simple dreams and didn't think she would
Right, Venus and Pisces in the second. Very simple dreams.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, or if it's in the second.
I just want to own a beauty suit.
Beauty suit, yeah, that further validates the idea of this particular time of birth.
Yeah, and then, I mean, her family torn apart by war. Mm-hmm. If you see somebody with a chart with Uranus opposing Mars in Cancer, or, a 10th house, 4th house, it could be in a retrograde situation with the Mars retrograde, it could be a past life situation, where someone was separated from their family, during war. Of course, history is riddled with such things, when we go back in history in that way. So, yeah, I mean, simple girl ends up on a world stage. I'm really fighting for the rights of her people. And actually, one thing I wanted to mention is that, let's see, she's the UN's first goodwill ambassador for the dignity of survivors of human trafficking, excuse me. She's currently working to bring the Islamic State before the International Criminal Court on charges of genocide and crimes against humanity. So that is such a classic Venus in Pisces in the second house, right? In terms of trying to, not just heal her country, but have a role in hopefully creating a ripple effect for justice across the world, and peace and the rights of people. Exactly. So the United Nations globe image is even more fitting with this particular soul.
And that Saturn trine Jupiter as well. It's such a very political international emphasis. Also, just the separation from family and war. Saturn in the first house, if it is right squaring Pluto in the 10th. It's like, some sort of nation or government or group of people, or, governments creating some kind of violent traumatic separation. Uranus is ruled, Saturn is ruled by that Uranus, opposing Mars. So just those archetypes kind of repeat themselves here, where there's violence and separation and, regimes and things like that.
I mean, you can really see, even if you don't have the exact birth time, with the Saturn trining that Jupiter rules the North Node. You can see all the trauma signatures, but it definitely looks like, she's going to land on her feet, hit the ground running, really, with that one. And obviously, her home will be elsewhere. Jupiter's a planet of international pursuits and other cultures. And when it's so close to the moon, it can oftentimes mean that you don't end up living in the place you were born.
Right. Yep. That's very true. Okay. So final chart to look at here is Donald Trump. I just had the thought it'd be really kind of interesting to look at his chart, overlaid with January 6th. Was it 2021? The insurrection?
No, it was 20. Oh,
it wasn't
yeah.
2022. It was 20. Must have been. Yeah, it was after the elections. It was 2021. Anyway, maybe if you see anything, if you want to pull it up, that might be really interesting. Obviously, he was the president of the United States. He's just announced he's going to run again in the 2024 election. President, of course, corresponds to the 10th house. CEO, boss, all that. That's also 10th house. So he's been all of those things. Uranus in this position, it's a very interesting thing where, again, you're looking at the soul reality. For a soul with Uranus in Gemini in the 10th house, who is not of a positive vibration, to be seeking a status, a position of power, the underlying consciousness here with that Uranus is more about the special interests of, well, fundamentally Pluto and Leo in the 12th himself, an underlying I'm needing to be the most important thing. But that Uranus corresponding to, I'm going to serve groups of people, this could be skin color, certain political groups. Fundamentally, when it comes down to it, anything that serves to further my own political agenda, he has used duplicity and the ability to say anything necessary in any particular moment to further his own career success. But Uranus corresponding to groups of people, and where we have both parts of society that are persecuted, underprivileged, not recognized by the mainstream, as well as elitist groups of people. He recently had a dinner with a bunch of white supremacists, and he seems to always really have this affinity towards white supremacists. He won't come out as one himself, but he's had a track record of being very overtly racist and discriminatory towards people of other skin colors, 10th house. He's supported by, some of his greatest supporters are people of white nationalists in the United States. There are also people, and this is a very interesting thing to look at, there are many people that support him and follow him that are also just disenfranchised with mainstream society. Now, this is a funny thing about Uranus. Eventually, you can't put people in a pigeonhole. So one thing that his presence in society as a public figure, as a political figure, has brought up is sort of this anarchy, disarray, disorganization of all these organized groups and parties of people. It's sort of completely reshaped the Republican political party, has turned the Republican Party almost against itself, groups within that, divisions within that. But then many people that otherwise identified as Democratic, that didn't identify with sort of the mainstream perspective, said, oh, I like this guy. He's an outsider. I like that part of him. So what's interesting is, like, there's this fine line that's blurred. A lot of Bernie Sanders supporters and are also kind of Donald Trump supporters, because what he was able to reflect and bring out within society is this pulse on, I don't resonate with the mainstream political modality, even though his consciousness is actually no different than any other political orientation that's about special interests and not really looking at what's benefiting the whole. He just has a way of being tricky about it and making people think that he's creating a government that is good for all people, but he's actually not. You could actually create a reality where your status and role in society becomes a point of collective trauma. So a lot of what he did is he actually turned people against each other. That's the whole dynamic here. It's a way of structuring reality where groups of people are not in harmony, not in resonance with other groups of people. And it's inherently grounded in this idea of othering those that don't fit in, others that are different. And the ability to pretend. I always think of, if you've watched Star Wars, Emperor Palpatine. He was the Lord of the Sith. But he would speak and he would express himself, and everyone in the Empire liked him. But really he was just pretending. And he was representing a very divisive consciousness. And anyone that's following his tweet and what he's been putting out there, it's very clear there's a correlation between sort of the rebellion, Uranus, that he instigated amongst particular groups of people, right? It's like an offset of the Republican Party that's sort of a Trump politicized, I'm angry at the status quo, let's go and have this huge rebellion turnover. He never said go and raid the White House, but he incited this, right, through what he's putting out there in that very tricky Gemini way. And this is on the North Node. This is a very well-developed quality that has been developed in many, many prior lifetimes that his soul's been wanting to further actualize. This is a soul that's been, okay, in the past, I was an outsider. I didn't quite make it all the way. I'm going to get better at succeeding. So he's doubled down on that capacity to almost like rise above the rules and the laws and what's right and what's ethical and do whatever he wants to further his own gain. So he's able to take groups of people to turn against other groups of people. So the whole January 6th insurrection is a great example of just that expression of Uranus in Gemini in the 10th house. The ability to indirectly, without saying anything specifically, incite some kind of rebellion against a political system in the White House itself. People wanted to kill the vice president because at that point, the vice president represented a way of being that was not compatible with who this soul wanted to be seen as politically and socially. So yeah, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I did look it up and I'd forgotten this, but Mars was at 29 degrees and 54 minutes of Aries.
Wait, your voice is a little bit low. Can you get closer to the mic?
Mars?
Yeah, there you go.
Was 29 degrees Aries and change.
On that day.
Yeah, so it was prior to that would have been squaring Saturn, his natal Saturn, squaring his Venus. So Mars was squaring, transiting Mercury, transiting Sun, maybe not transiting Mercury.
Where was Neptune?
I will get it here. Let's see. Neptune. Oh, goodness. You've got to be kidding me. Neptune was 18, almost 19 degrees Pisces. So it's his nose, squaring the moon and squaring Uranus. But yeah, the Mars was, the trigger really, right? I mean, they're just raging. They're running, they're storming the Capitol. They're threatening to kill. People did get killed on both sides. So I just happened to pull up 1 o'clock Pacific and it was 29:58. I mean, it was literally the last degrees in the minutes varies, it's a war signature. And let's see. Oh,
where were the nodes?
Wait, hang on. Pluto. I mean, Mars is squaring Pluto. Mars is squaring Pluto.
Oh, right at the end of Capricorn.
First quarter square. It looks like.
Yeah.
And it was squaring Mercury as well, which rules all of his Gemini stuff. And what did you want? What did you ask me?
Maybe I'll pull up the chart while we talk. I'm very curious to know where the nodes were.
19 degrees, Sag, Gemini.
There we go. Yeah, oh my gosh, it's absolutely worth just pulling this up. So I'm going to pull up a bi-wheel so we can all take a look at this. briefly. Obviously, the date, the time, and the location that I'm pulling up here is not accurate, but the date is correct. That day really just representing the essence of that Uranus. Honestly, it's like, oh, sorry, my mic. That day just really representing the essence of that Uranus. It's just so descriptive. And we have the nodes moving towards Uranus, Neptune squaring that.
Well,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, inspiring a political insurrection. And what's also, I mean, this is during his nodal return. He lost the election. Okay. It's such a powerful and fascinating case study. Nodal returns are such powerful times. So much energy can go in and go out. He lost the election, but at the same time, he gained. It's like his political influence really became crystallized as sort of this iconic statement in the world, and groups of people in the world and forever will look up to him as some kind of inspiring, in the same way that people look up to Hitler in some kind of distorted, right? And this then sets the stage for him to have still a lot of political influence and power, and that deceit and the trickery of being able to do all of these things and not get in trouble.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Jeffrey Wolfe Green once said, and I find this to be a very true and wise observation, souls that have, kind of joined the dark side, it's like they never go away. Like they can get away with one thing after another, and they just keep on bouncing back because they're identifying, they're alleging themselves to a very powerful, energy. Of course, that power is ultimately going to be their demise as well. It's not a real power. Just the fact that he's been able to get away with so much, break the rule. He says, I can shoot someone on the streets of New York City. It's an indirect quote. He's able to do that and still get away with that. And that's just a reflection of what he's built within his soul with that Uranus moving towards his north node.
Uranus is your ability to influence people telepathically, really. Right? You're sending out these, and his way with words. I mean, he doesn't seem like he doesn't have a very large vocabulary. He uses these very simple words to reach his, a certain population of people, I think. But it's just his nature. Like, when he used to give speeches, he would use words that were not, he wasn't very eloquent, put it that way. And so, but he would have a way of sending this message telepathically. So it's what is said and not said.
Yeah,
that reaches
very
people.
good.
And the undercurrent. And like you said also earlier about this energy, about what keeps him, it's like the evil propping him up. When people are doing, when people make a contract with evil or are aligning with that energy, and you're willing to sell your soul to the devil for it, that energy will keep you propped up. But at the end, of course, for how long? I mean, it's never going to end well.
Yeah, it never ends well. I'm noticing too, just also Uranus in Gemini and then Mercury in the 11th. That's a repeated signature, and how much of what he did was happening through Twitter, right? Speaking, sharing inciting words through social media platforms, Uranus, Gemini, and then he was kicked out of Twitter, right? Uranus in Gemini, Mercury in 11th. Like, you can't say that anymore. That's not appropriate. It's not allowed. That's against the rules. And then, but what does that do? That brings up all of this collective conversation around free speech and censorship. Uranus and Gemini in the 10th house. Some people really like that he was taken off of Twitter. Some people feel like that's a violation of free speech, right? So it's like that everything that happens in this guy's life brings up these social questions and these divisions and these disagreements amongst groups of people. It's just really fascinating.
Another thing I want to say too, you can tell that he has this king complex, right? Yeah. I mean, of course, that's not anything new, but Mars has gone all the way around the wheel, all the way in Leo, and even the Leo rising 2955.
Yeah.
I want to say that, I think his progress moon was in Virgo when he lost the election. Talk about humbling. But, not because Neptune was transiting, squaring the nodes. I mean, he was never going to accept it. It had to be false results. It had to be a false election. It couldn't be me. They all love me, right?
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting how you look at that through, through an evolving compass.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
All right. Well, we'll see if he actually ends up being able to run. That to me is like, how many times has the guy broken the law and he's still, I mean, come on. No, somebody's I think people are afraid to convict the first time ever convicting a president, and of course, who wants to unleash a load of people like that into the streets, right? So there's all these fears about collect this rebellion that ends up causing harm to others. So there's just a lot on the line. It's a crazy time.
Mm-hmm. We'll see what happens. I mean, I think one thing that we can really recognize from this consciousness with Uranus in the 10th house, the mainstream keeps on thinking, oh, there's no way he can get away with that. I mean, even when he was
Right.
first running and he said all these horrible sexist things, Uranus, Gemini 10th, he's like,
Yeah.
you said things that are completely sexist and inappropriate. And then he still got elected.
Yeah.
It keeps on happening that he acts out of alignment and all this comes out, but he still furthers. So it's just really important to recognize what we're dealing with here, to not make any kind of assumptions. So people are like, oh, there's no way, or, we don't know that.
I think what's interesting too, and kind of the last thing I'll say on the subject really is because what Jeffrey also used to teach is that uh, the law of 51-49. So there's 51% light and 49% shadow in the world, right? So when we are all making strides in our own evolution, there will almost inevitably be something to undermine those steps forward,
Mm-hmm.
which would be the shadow, not wanting you to evolve, right? So even somebody like Trump, who plenty of people have strong opinions about him, and yet he was able to get that many votes based on a lot of what you were talking about, Ari, I think. And so that is a 51-49 example in spades.
Mm-hmm.
That don't, and it will always be there. That's the thing. It's never going to go away. That shadow element on this planet, look back in history, it will follow us forward. There's always going to be that energy, and there's that energy in our own path. Like I said, when you're making strides forward and you are evolving, there will be an energy to try and undermine your footsteps, to make you question yourself, to make you doubt yourself. It's the same thing. We all know it for ourselves. And so it is about turning and facing it, whatever it is. And like Jesus said, how many times a day? Satan, get behind me. Countless times a day.
This brings up such an important point that feels really helpful to just speak to with Uranus. One thing that I observe happening, we saw this in social media and in mainstream. It's almost like how for a long time there was such divisiveness where I really found that there was almost an inability for non-Trump supporters to even respect Trump supporters. I mean, I know many Trump supporters. Obviously, many people will support Trump for many different reasons, and I don't agree with it. And I have my perspective of the soul. But where there is divisiveness and an inability for people to appreciate different opinions or perspectives, right? That divisiveness is the intention of that soul's consciousness, but actually the healing, really, that which Trump represents will continue to emerge within the collective field to reflect where within us we are trying to push out some elements within our own collective psyche. Like all of these community elements exist within each one of us. So where there's an unwillingness to acknowledge what exists inside, oh, push it out. So when Trump lost, there's almost like this, yay, we made it. And like, no, these things are still here. And there's groups of people, your brothers and your sisters, your family members, your cousins, your coworkers that feel incredibly alienated and ostracized now. And we have to give them a voice. So until we really think in an authentic, genuine, integrated unity, all of us included, all of our thoughts, opinions, feelings, perspectives, everything is a part of it. Until that happens, until we can get beyond that divisive way of thinking, we're always going to find these elements emerging to reflect that back to us. And if we can see the emergence of that as a invitation for healing, I think that's a very positive way of working with that.
Well, we've got Pluto entering Aquarius in March, so it's going to take some years now for us to work a lot of this out, this Uranian experience of extremes that we are all sharing on the planet right now. It's not just in this country, it is all over the world. So
Yeah.
this divisiveness. But it was a wonderful hour with you, hour
Yes.
plus, hour and a half. And we look forward to joining you all next time with Uranus in Aquarius, the sign that Uranus naturally rules, or the 11th house if you have that. Tune in next time. We'll be back before
Bye.
too long. Namaste.